So let's shift over to questions. Thank you so much for your great information there, Alex and Gwen. Really wonderful. We have a question here, folks. You can unmute yourself and ask your question or enter it in the chat box. I have. I'll read off a couple that are in the chat box here. One is, are there lessons from recharging groundwater in big, densely populated cities worldwide?
So we actually, would you like to? I can talk about a project. So the Quinnipiac River, there was a Superfund site on the Quinnipiac River, and one of the impacts was to a drinking water aquifer, and so we were funded to install a number of rain gardens in that would recharge the neighboring aquifer. So the intention was to recharge more groundwater in the adjacent aquifer that had not been impacted by the Superfund site as mitigation for the impact, and that was funded by the PRP, by the responsible party who had polluted that aquifer. That is something that's being thought about on a large scale, is trying to get water back into the ground. So in really dry environments, and there's, we have to move beyond putting clean water into our storm drains. And that's another reason why this green infrastructure isn't just right for places that have combined sewers. It's needed in places that have separated sewers too. We really need to be thinking about putting clean water back in the ground before discharging it as one point source into a river. But that can be scaled up and is honestly being scaled up in places like Las Vegas and San Diego, and South Africa is a big one. I don't know if there's, so they actually were supposed to run out of water. I can't remember, it was about a year ago now, and they managed to cut their use by 50%, and then were able to recharge their aquifer, and so they have extended their that timeline significantly. Now they're not done with the problems, but it's shown how possible it is for big cities to think about recharge.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't think it's based on groundwater, but I know that New York City and Philadelphia are just a couple like large cities in the area that are have implemented this green stormwater technology. These these small distributed bioswales throughout their city. Not just because they're very functional at getting a lot of water into the ground as opposed to into storm drains. So yeah, definitely look into those cities and see what they're doing.
Thank you. That was definitely informative. Thank you.
We have a question here from Anthony Zemba, and it's
hi Anthony.
It's he's got some upfront statements, so let me just read it to you. It says, Gwen has also served as a rotating member of the Connecticut Wetland in Lieu Fee program for 3 years. Thanks, Gwen. The program could continue to benefit from Gwen's and Alex's expertise through information sharing. We have reached out to NGOs, consulting firms, and regulatory agencies to gather data on costs for stream restoration. Any data that STS or others could share with the ILF program would help make our data set more robust so that we can better assess, justify the credit fee for linear foot of stream impacts. So kind of a statement, but I guess a question about any possibility of data sharing.
Can I ask, do you guys have a credit or a fee? What is the current cost per linear foot? Do you know?
Yeah, so right now we've been using $100 for $200 for per linear foot for intermittent water courses, and $600 per linear foot for perennial watercourse. So that's the 200 times 3, one for each bank and then one for the stream bed itself. So those
And how
numbers,
does that compare to what do you have for wetlands? It's like
the wetlands, it's based on cover type and service area. So the stream credit was basically just adopted by some of the previous ILF programs that were around. And so, we don't even really know if it's enough to fund restoration projects in Connecticut using Connecticut economy prices. And what we would like to do is adjust that one way or the other to make sure that it's enough to fund restoration, but also not make it so that it's prohibitive for the sale of credits.
sure.
And we know that every water course has so many different variables to consider, and that it impact cost. And so really the only way that we can approach it is to build a big enough, robust enough data set that we can average out those costs across all those variables. And knowing that, sometimes, the fee will not be able to generate enough money to cover certain types of restorations, stream restorations through the grant process, but other times it will. And oftentimes the people applying for the grants are matching it with other funding sources. So we don't necessarily have to cover the cost of every restoration project, but be able to, on the average, be able to do that.
Yeah, thanks, Anthony. I don't have a response to that right off the top of my head, but we could certainly get you some data related to that.
Yeah, and that's been the response from everybody. It's like,
yeah,
he's really taking the time to calculate out the cost.
right.
But
So you would need cost of projects and the linear feet of restoration, right? Those
Exactly.
are the two variables.
Just, divide those numbers. Yeah.
Okay.
So for like Pond Lily, I know there was a dam removal,
Yeah.
but also, stream restoration that you had to take into consideration, both upstream and downstream, right? To prevent like head cutting and,
Sure.
have you get the gradients right, and planting, perhaps, all those things come into play, and design and permitting costs too.
Right. All right.
Well, great. Thanks for your question, Anthony. Gwen,
you.
Alex, Anthony's email is in the chat box if you need it. And I can always provide that to you afterwards if you like. And we have one more question here. If anyone else has one, please let us know. But I'll read this one. It's a 3-part question about dams. What kind of obstacles do you encounter when removing dams? How does it get funded? And what percentage of dams in Connecticut are now obsolete?
You want to take it? You want me to?
An obstacle to dam removal can be sort of cultural, surprisingly. Lots of folks get used to the pond that's either in their backyard or in their town center or just in the woods that they like to visit. So there can be significant pushback from people who they like the landscape being what it is. I mean, I was just commenting on how all the ponds that I grew up on are all dammed ponds. So that can be a significant hurdle. Another hurdle is your second question, which is how does it get funded? Gwen was speaking earlier about how a lot of the money a lot of the projects are funded through grants. Federal grants and other grants. A lot of times grants need match. So you might get, you might have to match what the federal government gives you by 50% or 100%. And that can be either in kind, like services, or actual cash. But yeah, getting the money together. I think what Save the Sound brings to the table is a lot of experience, like what Gwen was saying, with all these different components. So managing the contractors, managing the consultants, managing the permitting, and managing the grants. So there's a lot that goes into it, and there's a lot of moving parts, and they all have to kind of get lined up at the same time. for that to sort of happen.
Yeah, just to plug one of the potential funding sources is what Anthony was just describing, which is the in lieu fee program. So if there's impacts to a river by the Department of Transportation or others that that a dam removal could be considered as mitigation for that activity, and that's one funding source that is somewhat new to the state of Connecticut. The Anthony's program that he manages with the Audubon is been around for a few years at this point, maybe 5. Is that right? I think so.
Any idea on?
Sorry, I was muted. Since 2013.
Okay. Yep. So,
Hey, Richard.
oh, wait, and what percentage? Okay, percentage of obsolete dams. So I have so the discrepancy for number of dams in Connecticut has to do with number of registered dams versus number of barriers that we think might exist in the state. So we know that there are over 4,000 dams, but that's as close as we have, the state has as a number for what how many dams there are. But of those, there are 40. Oh, okay. Yes, there are 40 state and federal flood control dams in the state. 400 municipal or nonprofit, so municipal or land trust owned dams. 264 dams that are owned by the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, and 3,696 privately owned dams in the state of Connecticut. And so that's, well over 3/4 of the dams in the state are privately owned. And so while that doesn't necessarily mean that all of those are quote obsolete, it does mean that there isn't someone who's being paid to keep them and maintain them. So some of those might be water supply, but the vast majority of dams were constructed in an industrial time with a miller, and the millers had their livelihood, and their livelihood was tied to the operation and the function of the dams themselves, and that just isn't true anymore. That changed significantly with the Industrial Revolution, and so there are plenty of dams that could be removed without tackling or considering to remove things like Candlewood Lake and other things that you might think of, or flood control structures. The Tolland Flood Control Dam. There are dams that serve purposes that are a part of our existence as people, as part of ecosystems. But particularly in the Northeast, there are many dams that don't fall into that category. So hopefully that helped with the numbers a little bit. It's not quite the percentage, but.
I look forward to having you come back and continuing this conversation. And thank you, audience, for joining us. If you're not a subscriber, please visit our website and sign up so you can hear about our ongoing conversation series and check out other things we're doing. It's futurefrogmen.org. So Gwen and Alex and audience, thank you so much. And we look forward to speaking with you again.
Thanks for watching. For more information, visit our website at www.futurefrogmen.org.